Welcome back. Let's reading some more about United States. The sun is shining again, but it's only 9. Then it will be up to 30 degrees again. But I just got up. It's 9:30. So let's read Upstate, New York. Just follow my read list one by one, and I need many weeks and months to do this because there's a lot of reading. So read this Upstate, New York. About $2,100 after tax my Danish pension, so I will have a hard time living in New York City. $2,000. I have $1,000 to renting a tiny room like this. I have a little food, so let's make a little food. So New York State go all the way up to the big lake, Lake Erie, I think it was. No, it's not lake. It's a big lake up north, close to the Canada border. So actually, New York is a kind of wilderness state, like Montana up north. They have border to Canada. No, they have a big wilderness, like big forest with black bears and even brown bears from Canada. And the biggest national park in the United States, they have this super large. I'm going to read about it later in some weeks. So just read one by one. But that's housing costs a lot of money everywhere in the United States. The cost of housing is a big problem for low-income families. So they will need to build more social housing. No, they need to build some housing. Low-income people can pay like $1,000 a month. But that's very expensive to build new building and to buy a property. To buy a property in New York City probably costs really a lot of money. You cannot building cheap housing on super expensive properties. So that's the problem. But then you need to do this subsidized housing. You need to do that. Then the state pays some money. The state needs to pay some money in house support money to low-income people, so they can afford to have a tiny home. But you have many lakes. And rivers all over the United States. You can just live on a lake or on the rivers in a sailboat or powerboat, or you can living in a caravan or trailer home or auto camper. They call it RVs, I think. Or you can have this truck campers. So if you have an American truck like this Ford F1, if you have a big truck, you can put a camper behind the truck called a truck camper. You can get some special American truck campers. You just put a bag on your truck. You can have a small house on your truck. So you can actually use this. There's a small cabin like on a small boat. A small cabin like on a big semi-truck. But that's big enough to sleep and cook foods. But of course you need some money. You need some money to do that. So that's many millions young people with low income. They cannot buy anything housing. I like to eat this. But we can start reading. My computer make noise. That's the electric blower. So let's start read.
Upstate New York. Upstate New York is a geographic region of New York that lies north and northwest of the New York City metropolitan area of downstate New York. Upstate includes the Middle and Upper Hudson Valley, the Capital District, the Mohawk Valley region, Central New York, the Southern Tier, the Finger Lakes region, Western New York, and the North Country. Major cities across upstate New York from east to west include the state capital of Albany, Utica, Binghamton, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. Before the European colonization of the United States, upstate New York was populated by several Native American tribes. It was home to the Iroquois Confederacy, an indigenous confederation of 6 tribes, known as the Six Nations. Henry Hudson made the first recorded European exploration of the region in 1609, and the Dutch erected Fort Orange, present-day Albany, in 1624, which was the first permanent European settlement in New York. The region saw many battles during the American Revolutionary War, with the Iroquois split between supporters of the Loyalists and supporters of the Revolutionaries. After the war ended, the 1784 Treaty of Fort Stanwix kicked off a series of treaties and purchases that saw the Iroquois cede the vast majority of their land in upstate New York to the newly formed United States. The 1825 opening of the Erie Canal across upstate New York transformed the economy of the region and the state. The canal greatly eased the movement of goods from across the upper Midwest and the cities along the Great Lakes through upstate New York and to the port of New York City. As a result, upstate New York became a hotbed for manufacturing during the Second Industrial Revolution, giving birth to such firms as General Electric, IBM, Kodak, and Xerox. The rapid industrialization led to a large influx of immigrants seeking jobs at factories across the region. Since the mid-20th century, American deindustrialization has contributed to economic and population decline, and the region is largely considered part of the Rust Belt. There are a wide variety of land uses in the region, including urban, suburban, forested preserve, and rural landscapes. Due to its vast areas of rural land, upstate also supports a strong agricultural industry, and is notable for its dairy, maple syrup, and fruit production, especially apples, as well as winemaking. Upstate New York includes a number of notable waterways, with the Susquehanna, Delaware, and Hudson rivers all originating in the region, and is bordered on its northern and western edges by the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. As a result, the region is a significant source of hydroelectric power, going back to the creation of the world's first hydroelectric dam by Nikola Tesla at Niagara Falls, and drinking water, with multiple reservoirs serving New York City. Upstate New York is home to numerous popular tourist and recreational destinations, including Niagara Falls, the Adirondack and Catskill Mountains, the Thousand Islands, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and the Finger Lakes. Definition, edit. There is no clear official boundary between upstate New York and downstate New York. The most expansive definition of the upstate New York region excludes only New York City and Long Island, which are always considered to be part of downstate New York. This usage is common among New York City residents and significantly less farther north. This definition is used by the Department of Environmental Conservation. A cheeky joke among Manhattanites is that anything north of 14th Street is upstate. Another usage locates the upstate/downstate boundary farther north, at the point where New York City's suburbs segue into its ecurbs, as the ecurbs do not generally fall within the Census Bureau-defined New York Newark urban area. This latter boundary places most of the lower Hudson Valley, or Westchester and Rockland counties, and about one-third of Putnam County, downstate, while putting the northwestern edge of Rockland County as well as the northernmost quarter of Westchester County, including Peekskill, upstate. Conversely, area residents often use Interstate 84 to delineate a boundary between upstate and downstate New York. Yet another usage follows the U.S. Census definition of the New York metropolitan area prior to 2010, which includes all of included Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties. This definition was used by the plaintiffs in the federal redistricting case Rodriguez v. Pataki. In New York state law, the definition of the upstate boundary also varies. While Westchester is seemingly always considered downstate under state law, some definitions include Rockland and Putnam counties in the downstate region, and others also include Orange and Dutchess counties. All of these counties are served by Metro-North Railroad lines. Ulster County, and, in the largest state-defined extent of downstate, Columbia County, are also sometimes included. The division line between the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York and the United States District Court for the Northern District of New York places Sullivan County and Dutchess County in the Southern District, and Ulster and Columbia counties in the Northern District. Residents of upstate New York typically prefer to identify with subregions, such as the Hudson Valley, Middle and Upper, the Capital District, the Mohawk Valley, the North Country, Western New York or Central New York. Within New York, surveys have had difficulty determining a consensus. In a 2016 poll of New York voters in which respondents were asked to choose among 4 definitions of where upstate begins, 3 were about equally common, selected by between 25% and 30% of respondents each: north of New York City, north of Westchester County, and north of Poughkeepsie in Dutchess County. The 4th, which also started north of Poughkeepsie but excluded Buffalo as a unique region neither upstate nor downstate, drew only 7%. An informal 2018 poll found the Hudson Valley region is the most heavily disputed area regarding whether it is upstate or downstate. A number of businesses and institutions in the area have upstate as part of their name. Examples of this include the State University of New York, Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, the Upstate New York chapter of the Arthritis Foundation serving 31 of New York's 62 counties, and the VA Healthcare Network Upstate New York, which includes all of New York State northward and westward from Kingston in Ulster County. Other organizations in New York with Upstate in their name include the Upstate Collegiate Athletic Association, now known as the Liberty League, the Upstate Correctional Facility, the Upstate New York Club Hockey League, the Upstate New York Synod, and the Upstate Citizens for Equality. History, edit. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources in this section. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. June 2015. Learn how and when to remove this message. Early history, edit. Before the arrival of Europeans, the area was long inhabited by Iroquoian-speaking people, mainly west of the Hudson River and around the Great Lakes, and Algonquian-speaking people, mainly east of the Hudson River. The conflict between the two peoples continued through the period of early European colonization, and the French, Dutch and English tended to ally with their trading partners among the indigenous peoples. The Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy of the Five, later Six, Nations was a powerful force in its home territory. The Five Nations territory extended from the Mohawk River Valley through the western part of the state and into current Pennsylvania. From this home base they also controlled at various times large swaths of additional territory throughout what is now the northeastern United States. The Gaswenta, two-row wampum treaty, made with the Dutch government in 1613, codified relations between the Haudenosaunee and European colonizers, and formed the basis of subsequent treaties. In the mid-17th century, during the Beaver Wars, the Iroquois were victorious and dominated the tribes of neutral Indians, Wenroranan and the Erie Indians in western New York. Survivors were mostly assimilated into the Seneca people of the Iroquois. Some are believed to have escaped to South Carolina, where they merged with other Indian tribes. The region was important from the first days of both French and Dutch colonization in the 17th century. The New Netherland colony encompassed the Hudson Valley from Manhattan Island north to the confluence of the Hudson and Mohawk rivers, where Fort Orange, later Albany, was established in 1624. The fort at Schenectady was built in 1661. The upper Hudson Valley was the center of much of the colony's fur trade, which was highly lucrative, serving a demand for furs in Europe. North and west of New Netherland, the French established trading posts along the St. Lawrence River and as far south as the shores of Onondaga Lake. They found both trading and proselytizing difficult among the Haudenosaunee, as Samuel de Champlain had alienated the Haudenosaunee during military forays from New France. In the 1640s, 3 French Jesuit missionaries to New France, Saint René Goupil, Saint Isaac Jogues, and Saint Jean de Lalande, were killed near the Mohawk village of Ossinan, which was located at the confluence of the Schoharie and Mohawk rivers, where the modern hamlet of Auriesville was later developed. They are considered to be the first 3 U.S. saints. England seized New Netherland by force in 1664, renaming it New York. The Dutch recaptured the colony 9 years later, but ceded it to England under the Treaty of Westminster of 1674. In the 18th century, the British consolidated their hold on the region. William Johnson, a Scottish trader, established an estate in the Mohawk Valley, living among the Mohawk, learning their language, and forging an alliance with them. He was appointed as the British Indian agent to the Iroquois. The British also encouraged settlement in the Mohawk Valley by other Europeans, including German Palatines beginning in the 1720s. In what became known as the Albany Congress in 1754, delegates from 7 of the 13 British North American colonies met at Albany to pursue a treaty with the powerful Mohawk. Benjamin Franklin, a Pennsylvania delegate, proposed a plan for uniting the 7 colonies that greatly exceeded the scope of the Congress. The delegates spent most of their time debating this Albany Plan of Union, one of the first attempts to form a union of the colonies under one government as far as might be necessary for defense and other general important purposes. The delegates approved an amended version, but the colonies rejected it. To counter the French militarily, the British established forts along Lake Ontario and at portages between the Mohawk Valley and the adjacent Lake Champlain and Lake Ontario watersheds. The region became the area for many conflicts of the French and Indian War, such as the Battle of Fort Oswego, 1756, and the Siege of Fort William Henry, which was later depicted in the work of James Fenimore Cooper, during the 7 Years' War. The British conquered New France by 1760 with the fall of Quebec. France formally ceded New France to the British in the Treaty of Paris of 1763. The same year, King George III issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which established the western and northern boundary of the province of New York at the limits of the Hudson, Mohawk and Delaware River watersheds. The area between that boundary and the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River, including west of the Appalachian Mountains, was to be the Indian Reserve. American Revolution, edit. Further information, New York and New Jersey Campaign. Between 1774 and 1783, deeply divided colonists waged civil war on each other directly and by proxy, through attacks such as the Seneca-led Cherry Valley and the Mohawk-led Cobleskill Massacre. In 1779, the Sullivan Expedition, a campaign by the Continental Army ordered by General George Washington, drove thousands of the Haudenosaunee from their villages, farms and lands in the region in an effort to both avenge and prevent such attacks. The region was strategically important to the war plans of both the British and the Continental forces. British efforts to divide the New England colonies from the rest led to battles including the Battle of Valcour Island and the Battle of Saratoga, a significant turning point in the war. While New York City remained in the hands of the British during most of the war, the upstate region was eventually dominated by the colonial forces. At the end of the war, the Continental Army was headquartered in Newburgh. Uncertain that the Continental Congress would pay back wages, some Continental officers threatened an uprising in what became known as the Newburgh Conspiracy. Post-Revolutionary period, edit. After the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris established the border between New York and British North America. The 45th parallel became the border with Quebec or Lower Canada. The St. Lawrence River, Lake Ontario, the Niagara River and Lake Erie became the border with Upper Canada. Great Britain continued to occupy military installations along the American shores of the Great Lakes until 1794, including Fort Niagara at the mouth of the Niagara River and Fort Ontario at the mouth of the Oswego River. The government of the new state of New York seized the property of New Yorkers who had remained loyal to the British Crown. Thousands emigrated to colonies that remained under British rule, such as Nova Scotia and the newly established Upper Canada, now Ontario. Haudenosaunee who had fought with the British also fled. The British Crown granted a large tract of land in Upper Canada to their Haudenosaunee allies, who established the Grand River Settlement. In the Federal Treaty of Canandaigua, the new United States recognized the title of the remaining Haudenosaunee to the land north and west of the Proclamation Line of 1763. Nevertheless, New York state officials and private land agents sought through the early 19th century to extinguish Indian title to these lands via non-federally sanctioned treaties, such as the Treaty of Big Tree. The treaties of Buffalo Creek were designed to finally remove the last of the native claims in western New York as part of the federal Indian removal program, but the purchaser failed to buy most of the land in time, and some of the tribes objected to their exclusion. 3 of the 4 reservations remain in the region to this day. One of the reservations leased out their land to form the city of Salamanca, and the coexistence of the predominantly white city and the reservation has been a source of contention since the 1990s. Both before and after the Revolution, boundary disputes with other colonies and their successor states also complicated American settlement. In conflict with the New York colony's claims west of the Hudson Valley, which placed the entire region in the sprawling Albany County, the province of Pennsylvania claimed much of the southern tier until 1774, while the Massachusetts Bay Colony claimed all of the region west of Massachusetts to the Great Lakes. The province of New York also claimed jurisdiction east to the Connecticut River. To pursue this claim north of Connecticut and Massachusetts, New York granted lands to settlers in what is now Vermont at the same time that New Hampshire made grants of the same lands. When Vermont declared independence in 1777, the new Republic of Vermont recognized the New Hampshire grants over those of New York. New Yorkers who lost land in Vermont came to be known as the Vermont Sufferers and were granted new lands in 1788 in the town of Bainbridge, New York. The dispute with Massachusetts over lands to the west of Massachusetts was settled in the 1786 Treaty of Hartford by dividing the rights to the land. The treaty granted sovereignty to the state of New York, but granted to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts the preemptive right to seek title to the land from the Haudenosaunee. The eastern boundary of the Massachusetts lands was thus known as the preemption line. This line runs from the Pennsylvania line due north to Lake Ontario, passing through Seneca Lake. The line was surveyed a second time due to initial errors. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts sold this land in large tracts, including the Phelps and Gorham Purchase and the Holland Purchase. Many of the settlers of what then became central and western New York came from the New England states. The central New York military tract, where many of the townships were given the names of classical military and literary figures by Robert Harper, was established to grant land to Revolutionary War veterans. Some of northern New York was founded by the hundreds of Canadian exiles who had fought in the 1st and 2nd Canadian regiments of the Continental Army, who were banished from Canada due to their rebellion against the Crown. 19th century, edit. Battles of the War of 1812-1815, were fought on the Niagara frontier, in the Champlain Valley, including the Battle of Plattsburgh, in the St. Lawrence Valley, and on Lake Ontario, including the Battle of Sackett's Harbor. British forces also burned Buffalo in retaliation for the American destruction of Newark in Canada. After the war, the U.S. government began to construct Fort Montgomery just south of the border at Rouse's Point on Lake Champlain. Subsequently, it was discovered that at that point, the actual 45th parallel was 3/4 of a mile south of the surveyed line, putting the fort, which became known as Fort Blunder, in Canada. This was not resolved until 1842 with the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, in which Great Britain and the United States decided to leave the border on the meandering line as surveyed. Slavery existed in New Netherland and the province of New York. New York was in the 1690s the largest importer of slaves among the American colonies. Slavery did not end with the American Revolution, although John Jay introduced an emancipation bill into the state assembly as early as 1777. Sojourner Truth was held as a slave in the Hudson Valley from the time she was born in 1797 until she escaped in 1826. Through efforts of the New York Manumission Society and others, New York began to adopt a policy of gradual emancipation in 1799. The law passed in 1817 that would finally emancipate slaves did not take effect for 10 years, giving slave owners an entire decade to sell their slaves away to other states. When the law finally took effect, the last 2,800 slaves in New York State were emancipated on the 4th of July, 1827. Although routes for travel on foot